everyone, my name's Stacey and welcome back to Fibro After Dark. I'm really glad that you're here with me today, whether you're listening while resting or trying to sleep or just needing a quiet moment. Thank you for spending this time with me. I have my video on today for the first time, which I'm a little bit nervous about, and I had procrastinated so much about having my hair and my makeup nice. But then I thought it wouldn't really portray the real me. And the whole point of this podcast is that it's supposed to be real and relatable. And that's not looking pristine every single day. So now and again, maybe, but every day, definitely not. So one thing that I've been obsessing about all week is this spot. I don't know if anyone is watching this season of The Boys on Amazon Prime, but I feel like my spot is as prominent as Ashley's other head. It's like when I'm talking to my partner, are you talking to me or are you talking to my other head? And I know it's probably not that noticeable to anybody else, but you know, when you have a spot, you just feel like everyone's staring at it. But I am definitely going to cover an episode in the future on how chronic illness affects the skin, because honestly, you're not imagining it is a genuine symptom. So before we get into today's episode, I just want to say I'm really sorry for the missed episode last week. And just to say a massive thank you for all the support recently, especially through social media, you know, meeting so many people as well. I'm just so grateful. I'll be honest, this podcast is very much in its infancy and I wasn't even sure that I would get one listen. So genuinely, thank you so much. One of the reasons I started this podcast was because chronic illness can feel incredibly lonely, and your ongoing support honestly reminds me that I am not alone in this. And I hope by doing this podcast, I can return that same feeling back to people as well, that, you know, you're not alone. Today's episode is about something that I think affects so many people with chronic illness, but also something that can feel really personal and really emotional to talk about. And that's losing careers through chronic illnesses, not just jobs, but careers. And a career can be, you know, it doesn't have to be high-flying corporate suit kind of position. It's basically anything that you love, a job that you love. I always think a job is something that you turn up, you clock in, you clock out. But a career is something you absolutely live and breathe. You've worked really hard for it, the life that you imagine for yourself, the routines, the independence, the confidence, and your whole identity that you tie to those careers as well. Before chronic illness became such a huge part of my life, I worked as a practice manager within the healthcare sector. And honestly, I cannot stress enough how much I genuinely loved what I did. I loved being busy. I loved having responsibility, and I loved feeling like I was this capable, dependable, needed person. And it genuinely wasn't just work for me. It was a huge part of who I was, of my identity. I do feel very fortunate in the way that I was diagnosed with having fibromyalgia. And my fibro was a lasting condition from recovering from stage 3 sepsis, where my organs had started to fail. So I can very clearly remember my last 6 months at work. I had this chronic pain. I remember doing yoga on my office floor before meetings to try and ease this crushing pain. It was like, you know, yoga poses for stomach pain, yoga poses for migraines. I'd be on my office floor, doubled over in pain, you know, before meetings, just to try and ease this pain so I could focus. And I just kept putting everything down to stress. Like, I had so many nosebleeds, migraines, like it was genuinely just awful. And my career had already started to decline before my diagnosis. And the difficult thing about high level management positions, and honestly educate me as well if it's the same in other careers, I can only talk about what I know. There is always someone waiting to take your seat at the table, and they don't care how they get it, they just want it. And I always think of it as a little bit like the alpha kind of situation, where I was already starting to show signs of weakness. And I genuinely thought it was just spiraling stress of us coming up to Christmas time, we were short staffed. It's like all the usual things you have at a management level, voters, recruitment, finance, just everything. Everything was sort of weighing on me quite a lot. And I genuinely thought everything was just stress, how in reality it was actually organ failure. So by the time I actually collapsed, my pancreas had already eaten a portion of itself. It had already gone into survival mode where it starts to eat away at itself. I was very yellow from the liver failure. I couldn't breathe very well due to having fluid on my lungs. And I genuinely just kept thinking that I was having panic attacks. This whole, feeling like somebody was sitting on my chest. I just remember thinking I was having a panic attack because of how stressed I was. And I remember so much of like how I thought, why am I feeling like this? I've been doing this job so long. And I just put it down to stress. And the more sort of in pain I was, the more my work was starting to decline. And now, like when I look back, and I think, how stressed must I have been to mistake, aggressive sepsis to the point where my organs had already started failing for stress. And you just think, like, how did I get those two mixed up? And how I lost my job from there on was possibly one of the most traumatic times I have ever been through. It's taken a lot of therapy. I've still got a long way to go, and I'll be honest, I'm still not quite there yet in accepting how it all ended. So it is something that we will revisit in the future. But for now, I want to sort of stress that the point is that people looking in will wonder, why I grieved my job of 12 years when it had genuinely nearly killed me. But for me, I wasn't just grieving a job, a career. I was grieving my whole identity. I loved every single minute of my job, even the stress. I thrive really, really well under pressure. So I thought I thrive under pressure, probably not under organ failure, but, I loved every single member of my team, past and present. And genuinely, I worked in the uniform sector. So for me, when I got there in the morning, I put my uniform on, I became somebody else. And I much preferred that version of me than the reality of me out of a uniform, which was, very nerdy. I'm sat here today in my Scooby-Doo t-shirt, not really any friends. Yeah, I much preferred the management, Stacey. Definitely. I felt like I was helping people. I felt that I was making a difference to people's lives. And I think along with that, there was a sense of like narcissism as well. The satisfaction that I got out of that. It's a question I always ask my therapist. It's like, am I a narcissist? And he'll always say, narcissists don't know they're narcissists. But I do think there was an element of that in my career, definitely, because in this high level position, I just had this false sense of power that I could make people's lives better. I could train them and give them a career and give them a purpose like I felt I had in that industry. So I didn't want to stop. Didn't want to stop. Every part of me I felt was in my career. So even when I had lost my job, I still didn't want to admit to myself that maybe I couldn't keep going in the same way anymore. I couldn't work in a physical environment, in a stressful environment, an environment that had long hours. It just wasn't going to be the same anymore. Accepting that was one of the hardest parts. And it wasn't even so much the physical symptoms, it really was the emotional side of it. Watching yourself slowly become someone you don't recognize anymore, and going from being this independent, career focused person to just struggling to get through the day. And I really did feel like my confidence just completely disappeared. Little by little, day by day, my confidence completely went. And there's so much grief in that, real grief. People talk about grieving loved ones, and nobody ever really talks about grieving the life you thought you'd have, or the life you thought you had as well, because I definitely think I romanticized a lot of it. So I think when chronic illness changes your ability to work in the same way, it can affect your identity in such a deep, deep way. And I stopped asking, what do I do for work? And I started asking, who even am I now without that uniform, without that position? Like, who am I? And that was genuinely like such a lonely, lonely place to be. And there were definitely moments where I felt completely left behind, watching other people continue progressing in their careers while my world just became so much smaller. And, there was a lot of emotional guilt with that as well. Like, I felt like I wasn't contributing in the same way anymore. I felt like I'd just completely lost my purpose, lost my identity, lost my confidence. Because to me, my job, my uniform, everything that I'd worked for, that was me. That was who I was. And yeah, if that's the way you're feeling now, or the way that you felt in the past, honestly, you are absolutely not alone in that feeling at all. So one thing that I'm definitely still learning, and as always with everything in this podcast, everything's an ongoing journey. I'm definitely not at my destination yet. But one thing that I'm definitely still learning is that our worth is not measured by productivity. And I know that's so much easier said than believed sometimes, but losing a career because of chronic illness does not make your worth any less. It does not make you weak. It does not erase everything you were before. You are still valuable, you are still as intelligent, and you are still deserving of purpose and happiness, even if your life looks completely different now. And I think part of this journey is slowly learning how to redefine that purpose. Maybe life doesn't look the way we originally planned, but that doesn't mean it can't still hold meaning, and you can't still get that satisfaction and that fulfillment that you're getting from your career. And honestly, like, even creating this podcast has reminded me that I still have a voice, that I still have experiences worth sharing. And maybe that's part of rebuilding something after loss as well. So if this episode has resonated with you, I would absolutely love to hear from you as well. Your experiences and your feelings. And honestly, if you feel comfortable sharing, your experiences could really, really help someone else listening feel less alone. I will always keep it confidential so you can be completely reassured that this is a safe space for you to share. And just like a little reminder as well, that in the future I am planning to do little short midweek Q&A episodes. So if you have questions or topics that you'd like me to talk about, like, please send them in. What I would love to do in the future as well is to bring in other voices and bring in guests that can bring a different perspective to the podcast. No question's too small. Sometimes the things that we quietly struggle with and we think are just like really insignificant are actually the things that other people really need to hear the most. So please do get in touch. So thank you so, so much for spending time with me today. Please know you are not alone in this at all. And if you haven't already, you can find me on social media. So please give this episode a like, follow, subscribe, all that jazz. And if you want to get in touch with me, I would love to hear from you. You can email me at fibroafterdark@hotmail.com. So until we speak again, which will definitely be a week, I won't leave it 2 weeks again. So it will be next week. So please take things gently and be kind to yourself. And thank you for listening.